and welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's just me today, Nate. I'm joined remotely by my guest today, writer Sam Asumadu. She is one of the directors, if not the sole director of Media Diversified, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. Sole founder, I guess. I don't call myself director. Sole founder.
So you recently have written about the British state's involvement in the war in Yemen. And I've followed Media Diversified for a long time, and I was excited to see this story just because I know that from some other shows that I have worked with, we have reported on the British arms industry's connections to Yemen, typically via Saudi Arabia, in the sense that they sell arms regardless, and there's a lot of sort of notional fail-safes to prevent misuse that are really non-existent. They just sound good on paper.
That's one of the things that's actually sort of somewhat public by the British government, because most of their involvement in that region is very covert and quite underhand. But I guess you can't really hide arms sales. Well, perhaps you can, part of it. But yes, so that I can imagine that you have spoken quite extensively about that. I mean, there's a great journalist called Matt Kennard, who is, I think, one of the co-founders of Declassified. And he's, I did a talk with him where I was talking about a particular thing, missing and murdered children in the UK, and he was talking about the arms industry, and it was actually fascinating, and he's done a lot of in-depth research. I don't know if you've had him on the show, but he's definitely one to get on.
I have not spoken with him. I've spoken with Aaron Murat, who is a freelance journalist who's talked quite a bit about specifically the arms trade side of things, and I was taken aback by this because I know Yemen has been more foregrounded, although it's never really a top headline issue in the US or in the UK. But it's been foregrounded, I think, to some extent since 2014. But the U.S.'s involvement in Yemen goes back a long ways, and specifically U.S. military direct cooperation with Saleh's government started in the first Bush administration and was directly like military to military, among other things. And I was interested in the UK government's background to this because, on one hand, basically anything that happens in the Arabian Peninsula, there's probably a British footprint in it somewhere, whether it's, World War I era borders or literally something that's happening as an ongoing policy.
I have to say, for me, I only know about US involvement in Yemen from 2001, approximately. There probably is involvement before that, but that's my area of knowledge. Britain, obviously, I mean, what I'd say is, really, if you want to start looking at this region and this particular war, you actually have to. Even though I said it was only around a 20-year war in my article, you have to actually go back to 1916, which was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is also called the Asia Minor Agreement, and that was a secret convention that was made during World War One between Britain and France. You probably know a bit about it. It's also involved Russia, of course, because it was in effect the sort of dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, the agreement is I mean, it's notorious. Well, it's notorious in the Middle East. It should be notorious here, but I'm sure quite a lot of people have forgotten what it is and what it's about in the UK, at least. I don't know about the US. I guess you had
I don't think people really know about it at all. I mean,
no?
It's like the Durand Line. It's massively significant to the people in the region it lives in. The Durand Line's case in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but outside of those regions or those diaspora communities, like, people don't talk about it at all. Yeah.
I mean, for me, actually, I only first heard about it in 2013. I read a fantastic article by Patrick Coburn in the LRB called "Is This the End of the Sykes-Picot Agreement?" And in there, he's actually talking. I mean, he centers his argument around Syria. I mean, he visited that region and talked to a lot of people in Iraq and so on, and that's the Sykes-Picot is very much on their mind because they thought, so you've got I was just about to say you've got to divide up the people in Iraq, and then you can. That is not what I want to say at all. But Kurds had a different opinion of the Sykes-Picot agreement, whilst other non-Kurds think of it differently as well. But the point was, it has affected every region in the Middle East, and certainly Syria. And obviously then, you've got the Arab Spring. But just to say a little bit more about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, because I think it's worth people knowing, it led to the division of Turkish-held Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Palestine into, sort of various French and British administered areas. I mean, it was about influence, the sort of getting rid of the Ottoman Empire spheres of influence and giving it to the French and the British, with a bit of Russia thrown in there, and so it meant that Britain could take direct control over of much of the region, actually, and France otherwise too. But then you had Palestine. That was held in the international administration for that time. Russia were involved in that in the region, Mosul in northern Iraq and Jordan. I mean, basically, they carved up the Middle East with their egotistical and non-historical knowledge of the region, and it's affecting all these countries still today, including Yemen, which is what you initially asked me to come on and talk to you about. But so Arab Spring, Syrian Civil War, Yemen, ACAP, which is well, I don't know if you know AQAP.
Yeah, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yes. So that's a merger between Al Qaeda's Yemeni and Saudi branches. So they were formed in 2019. So all that, what happened after that, was also about Sykes Picot. So I just wanted to make sure I got that in there whilst we talked.
Yeah. So what I understood is that obviously post 2001, the U.S. got heavily involved with both interventionist wars abroad. I mean, obviously Afghanistan was first, then subsequently Iraq, but the U.S. also shored up a lot of support to and also I think it's fair to say that other G7 countries, NATO countries, got involved in similar efforts. But in Yemen's case, you had a civil war that had gone on back and forth across the country. Yemen was at one point divided into North Yemen and South Yemen. There was at one point a socialist republic in Yemen.
A lot of tribal and different religious groups there that sort of meld together.
Yeah,
more or less did for a while.
And in 2004, the leader of the Houthi movement was killed in a government crackdown, and that basically intensified the civil war.
Exactly. I mean, from what I know, the sort of Western counter-terrorism effort in Yemen began in 2001 because of Al Qaeda and the various training camps that they had. With Osama bin Laden and so on. And so then they started doing trying to destroy the camps at that point. But yes, 2004 is when the Houthi leader. I mean, they weren't called Houthis then. They took on that name after he was killed. Yeah, that was
his surname or his tribal name.
And exactly.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that there is a dynamic here that the Houthi movement is a Shia Muslim movement, and Yemen has
specifically Zaidi. When you say Shia, because then that links them to Iran directly, which is a very contentious issue. So Zaidi. And
the point I would make is that I was going to move right into that, which is that anytime there is any in the Middle East, anytime there is a Shia-led government, like you said, even if in their case they're a minority sect of Shia Islam, there is this sort of, call it, global counter-terrorist / security state response that directly tries to tie them to the Iranian government.
Which is, there must be an alarm ringing somewhere, like the bat signal.
And I mean, like people get so into these sort of webs of conspiracies about these things and I'm not talking about just random people online. I'm talking about, I recall very clearly seeing a presentation, for example, from the former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, who is a complete nutcase. Flynn gave a presentation where he basically tried to advance the theory that the Muslim Brotherhood was like this super umbrella organization for all Islamist movements across the world, but which is bizarre when you think about the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood is specifically an Islamist political movement in Egypt, and that the idea of a Sunni Islamist movement in Egypt being like the supreme order givers to the Iranian government and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but also lumped into this was Vincent Maduro's government in Venezuela somehow.
Wow!
Like he basically, basically everyone was taking orders,
lumped everybody together
from the Iranians, but the Iranians were being controlled by the Egyptians. It made no sense whatsoever unless you're completely deranged. I mean,
I guess he sort of grabbed onto the word brotherhood and thought, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I recall getting a presentation when I was in the military where a guy basically gave us a really pretty good in-depth thing about sort of like using social cues and things along those lines when trying to conduct conduct human intelligence. It was just more like a briefing of, hey, if you want to do this stuff in the future, here's some training we can do. But then he went on this tirade about how like there was a secret message encoded in the Iranian flag that was suggesting they were going to nuke Jerusalem. And I was just like, what the?
When is this? What year is this? Has he always been crazy?
This would have been probably 2011, 2012. Gosh, like, right. But I mean, the point I'd make is that I feel like it's really important. We were talking about the fact that the Houthis are Zaidis, the fact that they're a minority sect of Shia Islam, and the fact that like the argument advanced for forever about why U.S. and U.K. and European military powers should support the Saudis against the Houthis has specifically been tied to this idea that somehow Iran is in charge again. And I bring up this kind of a digression about Michael Flynn and a lot of these crackpot theories because that is, I'm not going to say that it's popular, but there are enough people working in that field in the US and I presume the UK, but certainly in the US, who believe that anytime, basically anything officially linked to Shia Islam must be an Iranian plot. And this comes up again.
Yeah, I think they don't even know their own influence, apparently.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that this stuff then this comes around where you have a situation where you have one of the poorest countries in the Middle East, a country that's run out of oil and is probably going to run out of water, incredibly impoverished society that's being brutalized by both a bombing campaign and also blockades. And the argument advanced is like, well, no, we have to do this. We have to crush the life out of this society because we don't like their government because we think Iran is calling the shots.
You know what? Saudi Arabia have far more influence over far many more years than Iran have ever had in Yemen, because they are putting Wahhabi mosques in there from Saleh's days. Saleh is one of, I call him a puppet. I'm not even sure, he's there for everybody, anybody that can give him some sort of what he wants, whatever that may be at that time. Sorry, I know he's gone now, but Wahhabi mosques, religious centers were being were being implemented in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen from early days, and that is why the Houthis they built this opposition against Saleh, because they thought there's so much more outside influence in this country and also domestically, the president was not distributing resources amongst the country, the north and south. I mean, there's all these arguments about secession and so on. It's really, Yemen is a very complicated country. I mean, every country is complicated, but with Yemen, because there's been so little light shed on it, you don't realize how complicated it is, and you don't know how much Saudi Arabia has had such a big influence on the place. And so to say that Iran is the one controlling the Houthis or whoever, it's absolute nonsense, in my opinion. Yeah. So somebody else can come along and tell me that I'm wrong, and I will listen to their argument. But this is what I see from what I have researched. Yeah,
I mean, I would say that to me, it's always you don't want to say, okay, Iran has zero soft power. Great,
yeah,
okay,
no,
I accept that, but I also like when you look at the situation and you think, here is a country much poorer than its neighbor to the north, with which it's had a significant amount of economic and social cooperation for a long time. It had at one point a president who was more or less friendly to the Saudis. They share the same language. Which country do you think is going to have more influence? You know what I mean?
Indeed. And I mean, think, where did the Al Qaeda branch of Saudi Arabia, where did they go? Once they were kicked out, they went to Yemen.
Yeah. They went to Yemen. They were, I mean, they were in, and that's the thing too that I feel like people fail to recall about this stuff is that if you follow the story of Al Qaeda, post the war in Afghanistan, they were around that region significantly. They were in Saudi Arabia, they were in Yemen, or they are still in Yemen. They were in Sudan for a long time. They went to Afghanistan, but
Sudan as well. I didn't know that, actually.
So crazy story, but they went to Sudan first, if I'm not mistaken, and they got kicked out of Sudan in order to go to Afghanistan. One of the reasons why they got kicked out of Sudan was they had the tacit support of the president, but they tried to smuggle a bomb to kill Hosni Mubarak into Egypt using Sudanese diplomatic plates.
Good God,
and so
really?
at that point,
Idiotic and murderous.
Yeah. They were just like, the Sudanese government was just like, get out now, or we're arresting all of you. So they went up going to Afghanistan. This would have been like 96, I think. So one of the things that I'm interested in is your perspective on, say, circa 2022, right now, the British state's involvement in Yemen, because I know that there have been motions passed in Parliament here in the UK specifically to stop arms sales to Yemen, and or rather to Saudi Arabia. And my impression
at this point, that's not going to. It's not going to matter.
Really, but my impression was that even when those were passed, it didn't matter anyway. They still went forward. Like it was done symbolically, much like in the U.S. President Biden has basically claimed they're going to stop supporting the Saudis in Yemen, but
yeah, I mean, he said that publicly. What is he saying privately? What is the general saying privately? Because this has all been very undercover so far.
And I am 100% convinced that if you know anything about the U.S. military's involvement in Saudi Arabia, there are so many people sent over there as military advisors, and like those military advisors are doing everything from training new recruits in Saudi Arabia to advising their strategic command. I am not convinced that no matter what is said officially, like you said, that they've ceased military to military cooperation with them, because
I find that very unlikely.
Yeah.
It's the same with Britain. I mean, Britain has been training Yemen forces for decades now. Actually,
that was the point that you raised in your article, I think, too, was the extent to which significant numbers of Saudi military officers were trained in the United Kingdom. Yeah.
There's been cooperation between the three axes. Should we call them the new axes of evil?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shock to me because like the same with the U.S. I mean, I don't know if you knew about my background, but I was an Army officer in the U.S. and then
I didn't. You mentioned it briefly. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was an infantry officer in the Army, and I deployed to Afghanistan in 2009, 2010. My experiences there made me very opposed to continuing U.S. military presence abroad, and I wound up getting out of the military and then becoming a writer. But I had the experience because when I went through officer training, both as a lieutenant as a captain, there was a significant amount of international student training that was going on as well. They were just in our class with us, and it would be people from everywhere you could imagine.
Which countries?
I mean, from all over. The guy who's now I believe the Secretary of Defense or the Chief of Staff of the Liberian Army was one of my classmates. He was a second lieutenant at the time, so he's now a 3-star general. Respect to him for getting promoted that fast. But we had people from the
there's certain people that get promoted fast. I don't know if respect is the right word, but whatever.
For the Middle East and North Africa, we had people from everything from like a couple of officers from Tunisia, a bunch of guys from Lebanon, from the Lebanese Military Academy. Was this at
Leavenworth?
No. I was at Fort Benning. Leavenworth is where they do the command and staff training for more senior officers. But I was an infantry officer, so I was at Fort Benning in the state of Georgia, and we had one of the guys with us was one of the Crown Princes of Jordan. Like he was actually really good. I mean, he'd been to Sandhurst. He knew how to sort of be a military officer. But a lot of these guys, there was a participation program with the Lebanese military, and I think a lot of it was just to try to draw the Lebanese military closer to the U.S. in the sense that these guys were all military academy graduates, which in Lebanon means they probably came from wealthy families, which meant in the future they'd probably be in senior positions, and so it was sort of like inculcating friendship. Of course,
so all of this, it's purposely made collegial. They make people friends so that people become friends and then cooperate and send a quick WhatsApp message or Signal message. Oh, how you doing? How's your family? Oh, can we bomb this place?
Well, something that I'd point out too is that there were a lot of Saudis, and there always were throughout. All the time that I was in the training schools I went to, there would be Saudi officers, like lieutenants, captains, majors, basically every echelon they'd send the Saudi military. Now, something that I would say about the Saudi military in my experience is that if you thought Lebanon has an unhealthy culture with regard to the officers feeling as though their job is to just, tell the enlisted what to do and do nothing themselves, Saudi Arabia makes Lebanon look like the most egalitarian place on the planet, like in terms of what those guys showed up expecting to do. And I bring this up not to denigrate Saudi society so much as I want to say that I genuinely feel as though, and this is just my personal opinion, it would be extraordinarily difficult for the Saudi military to do anything competently and we're not, I'm not patting them on the back for what they've done, but to do anything competently without a significant amount of international assistance, as in advisors, people both on the ground and people, at higher echelons advising them. And that, I think the same could be said of the GCC countries, places like the UAE, or Qatar or Oman, places like that.
I don't know. Qatar feels a bit more professional. Is that the right word? I don't know. A bit more advanced. But yeah, UAE, I can agree with that.
Yeah. Their military is typically, they bring in lots and lots of foreign advisors. There's like a kind of a second career for Commonwealth country senior officers to come in and advise the Emiratis or the Qataris.
It's interesting. This the competency of various armies. I mean, I spent some time in Uganda, and at one of the things I went to a conference, some sort of peace conference, like Amnesty for former Lord's Resistance Army officers, and Museveni, President Museveni, came up there. And he came with his the PGB, which is his private army. Yeah. And having before met other soldiers in the Ugandan army, the PGB are like some elite force. What was strange was they're very polite, but absolutely incisive. They know what they're doing. And I thought, oh wow, this is maybe why he stayed in power so long. He's got the right people around him. And I mean, this is, and that actually translates to Britain as well. I used to work for a financial PR company, just doing events, but we put on an event where Sherry Blair came along to speak, and so the events we did was AGMs and whatever for FTSE companies and stuff, and sometimes we had talks on, and she came to do a talk, and had her Secret Service there, and they were so unobtrusive and in the background, really good, very polite, which always helps. Whilst 3 days before we'd had some company that would it's probably not that I've signed an
sure, I believe me, I know exactly what you're talking about.
But anyway, we had a company in, and they, whatever, they weren't like, and they had their security, and these guys came in with their sunglasses, being the big I am, just like ridiculous. Like these were not the elite of the Secret Service, of the bodyguard types, where Sherry Blair had those very, very professional, very,
and they're probably all ex-SAS or ex-Paris.
Something's going on there. But yeah, so that it took, Uganda, PGB here, whatever service Sherry Blair uses.
It's a similar thing in the Emirates. The royal family in the Emirates has basically a brigade-size element, so call it about 3,500 soldiers that are all Emirati citizens and are all basically like recruited and trained both for competency and also for loyalty to the royal family. So like they don't even trust their own military, which has been seriously trained from the outside. They basically post Arab Spring, they set up their own unit basically as like almost sort of like a palace guards. And the impression that I get is that, bringing this back to the situation in Yemen, I don't think that Saleh's government was that different, in the sense that Yemen doesn't have and didn't have the resource wealth to be able to, for example, like the Emiratis, basically buy a 1-star Australian general to come over and lead their entire development effort for their military. But Saleh did cooperate with the U.S. significantly. I remember speaking with a guy who, would have been probably a major or a lieutenant colonel at the time in the U.S. Army, and his boss was the Arabian Peninsula sort of like regional task force leader for Joint Special Operations Command. And they went into a meeting. He went into a meeting with his boss, with Saleh, and basically his boss was apparently, taking Saleh to task for decisions he was making, with regard to security cooperation, because he thought that was going to destabilize the country. And I bring that up not to say that guy is impressive so much as to say that was
Saleh wasn't.
That's the situation that you would have had a colonel or a general officer from the U.S. military basically in there being like, here's what you're going to do. Looking at the situation in Yemen, I feel like the question that I wanted to ask you was, what do you feel like British people or American observers of British politics should know about the British state's involvement in this conflict?
Right. I think they should know what actually David Davis said. MP David Davis made some statements in Parliament a while back, and he was, or is, or was, I'm not actually sure right now, the chair of the UK's all-party parliamentary group on drones. And what he said is if we know we're handing intelligence over, which will be used in a killing, then we ought to be confident that it meets our own rules and guidelines. If there are deaths of civilians, there's a moral and legal problem. I mean, what his issue is that, you know, for every one person that we kill as collateral damage, you know, another 40 to 60 people will rise up and oppose, whether it's Britain, America, or Yemen, etc. Because, I mean, as I said, Yemen's a complicated region. So, and there's tribal or religious differences and so on. But, you know, one thing that they do stand for is opposing tyranny. And so if we continue in our cooperation in this, whether covertly or overtly, all it does is put a target on Britain even more so. And that means, you know, that rolls down the line where we get more draconian laws and policies by our various, whether it's Labour or Conservative, where they try and, you know, like this Nationality and Borders Bill, making people stateless if they're a presumed threat and so on. So if the more threat we have, the more opponents we make abroad, the more draconian things that happen where we are, whether that's in the US or Britain. So, yeah, I guess that's what I'd like people to know. That's why we should get out, and we should make sure that, you know, that there's a path to Yemen getting back on its feet. You already said earlier that they're about to run out of water. I mean, they've already run out of oil, and these things are not sustainable, and they go out of borders. I mean, as much as these governments care about borders are porous. Yeah,
especially in, you know, non-developed part or less developed parts of the world. Like,
exactly,
it's not really. Yeah, I mean, the border between Oman and Yemen is not, you know, super rigid. The border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen is primarily in a desert / mountainous region. Like, you know, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan in many places might as well not exist. So, yeah, like you're saying,
I mean, if people are determined to cause mayhem, they will do, regardless of your controls at the airports or your boats or whatever. And let me divorce this from what I, you know, term asylum seekers and refugees and migrants, whether they're economic or not economic migrants. That is completely different. This is about the people that we make through our foreign intervention methods and our various counterinsurgency, all of this stuff. This is our problem, and we need to sort it out.
And I think that American listeners may not be familiar with how involved Britain's military has been, say, post-Arab Spring in places like in Libya, in Syria, and in Yemen. And I think also Americans may be aware of this if they've been following it, but may not. The extent to which, you know, if you look at some of the other debates and developments taking place in the United Kingdom with regard to, for example, Shamima Begum's case or the Nationality and Borders Bill, the British government basically asserting that it has the right to revoke anyone's citizenship without notice if it wants to. I feel like there's a Yemen link to this that I want to bring up specifically with regard to the United States, and that's what happened to Anwar al-Awlaki and his family. That you have Anwar al-Awlaki was an American citizen. He was born in New Mexico. His father was a researcher working in I think Sandia National Labs and he became an Islamist and then ran a more or less propaganda site in English to recruit people to Al-Qaeda. He was killed in a drone strike that was authorized by Obama. He was specifically on the list to, you know, like on a kill list.
What year was that? Can you remember?
He died in 2011, I believe. Right. And in the process of killing him, they killed his son, Abdurrahman al-Awlaki, who was 16 at the time, also a U.S. citizen. And then subsequently in 2017, Trump authorized a special ops raid in southern Yemen, and Anwar al-Awlaki's 8-year-old daughter was killed in that raid.
Gosh, horrendous.
Nawara al-Awlaki. And it's one of these situations where, you know, she also is a U.S. citizen because the way U.S. citizenship works, her father was born in the U.S., he's a citizen, she's automatically an American citizen.
It's different in Britain. But
yeah. I know in Britain it's a nightmare.
We did have something called birthright citizenship, but Thatcher got rid of it in 83.
I was actually born right on the across the dividing line of that. My mom's a British citizen.
Really. I was before that, so I've always been seen as a British citizen. You know, from 79 until Priti Patel told me I'm not, apparently.
Oh my God.
But what you say about these bombings, so the one that I know about is in 2010. So David Petraeus was the general at that
Mhm,
time,
mhm. He's head of
responsible for
CENTCOM, yeah.
Yemen. Yeah, and he met President Salah, and they agreed that the Americans should, deploy drones and so on. And so a lot of this stuff I know from that Vice article, which I quoted quite extensively in my article, just to actually give a shout out to Namir Shabibi and Jack Watlin for that. But there's one that I know that really made a difference, drone-wise, was in 2010, where they droned a US cruise missile attack on a Bedouin encampment in Yemen, which killed 45 civilians, including 12 women and 22 children. And from that's when the UK got really concerned about it and about the rules of engagement and so on. And so that's because there was a British citizen in that camp who'd actually spent time studying at University College London, and it was president of the Islamic Society. So from then. That caused some more issues for us, I'd say, than the than the bombings that you've, the killings that you've said about.
And in al-Awlaki's case, I mean, it was really cynical. I recall Jay Carney, who was Obama's press secretary and is now just like a senior guy for public relations at Amazon. He go figure, yeah.
That pipeline.
The Obama to tech giant pipeline is incredible, isn't it? But he was asked specifically, like, I don't remember the exact wording of the question, but it was something to the effect of, what are your thoughts on the fact that here is a 16-year-old American citizen who was a minor who was killed in a drone strike by his own government, without, basically there's no veto involved, there's no oversight involved, it was just a decision you take. And Carney's response was basically like, my thoughts are to anyone concerned that just maybe have more responsible parents.
What?
That's what he said. He said, have more responsible parents. And it's like, listen,
he's a PR guy, did you say?
Yes, he is. And I mean, it's like, it's just to me that gets me is that I feel as though Yemen, because of its status as an underdeveloped country, the poor man of the Middle East, and because of the fact that the Yemeni diaspora doesn't have the kind of political weight behind it that other diasporas from the region might. And the fact that the US, Saudi, or call it UK, G7, Saudi cooperation that takes place, that relationship is so important to the U.S. economy and also just sort of the U.S. defense establishment. Saudi Arabia has more or less cemented itself as the sort of counterterrorism beneficiary, which is very ironic given how many of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudi. But
it's so ridiculous.
But the thing about it is that because of that, Yemen, I feel as though Yemen, both Yemeni people and anyone of other nationalities who's wrapped up in Yemen, they're all treated as completely expendable. Like it's sort of this is a cost of doing business. And I always am concerned when I see this stuff happen because without calling it directly a slippery slope, I'm always really concerned because you can see that rhetoric seep into other things. I don't think that, you could look at, for example, these kinds of things happening now and say there's no relationship between this and, subsequent things. The hard right in America, the sort of Steve Bannon, I'm forgetting the name of it, but Stephen Miller, people like that, they're really fixated on the idea of ending birthright citizenship, which would be more difficult in America because it's from a constitutional amendment, but still, that's what they want. They want to get rid of it, and they don't want they want explicitly racialized American citizenship, much like the kind of underhanded stuff that the UK government is doing right now.
Well, you know what? I've been wondering who are Priti Patel's advisors, and I really want to look into it more because. She was saying some like ridiculous stuff back in the day when she was there. She's been various ministers over time and shadow ministers, but the rhetoric has really she's always been like an authoritarian. Her support of the the death penalty, or at least what she said on the BBC Question Time over 10 years ago now, I suppose. But the rhetoric has changed, since she's got this role. How she got this role is a mystery. Well, it's not a mystery to me, but she was fired.
Yeah, she was sacked for doing an off the books diplomatic visit to Israel. Yeah,
of course. But so I think I look at some of the new atheists in America, the famous ones, Sam whatever and so on, and his wife, or the historian here and his wife. And I think, is any of this coming from them? Who is advising her? Because this seems, for one part, maybe this is all a grab for power, and she wants to become prime minister. So the
way to do that as a British Gujarati woman is to basically appease the instincts of the guys who want.
But there's a lot. It's hard to appease the British public. But then too, there's also this American connection, and some of the you've got the Fellowship, and also known as the Fellowship in America, who have a lot of influence, free trade, anti-abortion, all of that sort of thing. And they have influence all over Africa at the moment, very much so, with the anti-gay
marriage
bill
laws and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I wonder, who is she talking to? Who is it? Is it about being prime minister, or is it about influence in America? Is it because, so I'll just very briefly go off topic, but I'll bring it back to what I want to say. So I started making a documentary in 2010, I think it was, called Born Again in the United States of Uganda. And it was nominally about the anti-gay bill in Uganda, which was coming at that time. And it was brought forth by an MP called Bahati. So, it turned out that Bahati is a member of the Fellowship. Do you know much about them?
No, I've heard it referenced, but I don't know much.
Okay, yeah. So that's made up of Republican and liberal, whatever the other party called.
Democrats,
but politicians, and then people of influence, very rich people, and they are anti-abortion. They're for free trade, and there's something else, all nasty, pernicious stuff. And what happened in 2010? This Bahati brought out this bill. At the same time, the Texan Republican Party brought out their own manifesto. If you compare the two documents, they're very similar in language and very similar in intention. So it's obvious that somebody was cribbing from the other, and I believe it was Bahati cribbing from the Texas Republican Party, and which have members that are in the Fellowship. And so the Fellowship, they fund the National Prayer Breakfast in America.
Yeah.
The one which every president goes to. They also fund the National Prayer Breakfast in Uganda. Yeah. And so what I was looking at in my documentary, which I never got to finish, was actually looking at their influence, and which is being covered by other people. It's not just me looking into it. I'm not the intrepid person, but also looking at money laundering, the money that was coming from America to Uganda, and which was funding all these anti-gay people, anti-gay pastors and so on. And, it was coming from politicians, but it was coming from mega churches, but also this Fellowship and so on. And the reason they were doing it, in my opinion, was to lay the ground to being more draconian in America, to get rid of, to have their own anti-gay bill, to, do more anti-abortion stuff. And that's where they do their testing ground in Africa. And so I wonder, with the National Anti-Borders Bill and Priti Patel, is this a testing ground for America to do the same, to get rid of birthright citizenship?
I don't know.
What you call banker babies, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild because obviously, I explain this to people in the U.S. that Britain did have birthright citizenship and Thatcher ended it. And, so in a way, like, it's not impossible. It's not, granted, obviously Britain's a, European country. And I think the, ethno-nationalist chauvinism has more of a constituency here in mainstream politics, because America, while there are those tendencies, like by and large, everyone in America, regardless of being on where they are in the political spectrum, represented by the two major parties, there's going to be enough people with immigrant backgrounds of some stripe that you can't be as like that level of hardcore chauvinism.
That's the same here. Look at our parliament. The cabinet is filled with brown and black people, and yet they're willing to sort of give control to Priti to support herself. Will she end up doing that?
Her and Sajid Javid. I remember them saying that, more or less saying with pride that their parents would have been prevented from coming to this country if these laws were in effect. I just look at it and say, I think the U.S. dynamic is slightly different, because the best way I can describe it is, I don't know what caused, what was the impetus for the sort of reactionary movement in Britain that led to Thatcher removing birthright citizenship. I'm going to presume it was stuff like related to Enoch Powell and things along those lines.
Oh, there was too many Indian people here. She thought that's what was going on.
Yeah, the stuff that post and like post people, Ugandan Asians coming over, things along those lines, and then all of the in the situation in the 70s, and that kind of culminated in America. I think there's always been this ethno-nationalist kind of undercurrent. If you're familiar with the movie Gangs of New York, like that, the Know Nothings, like that stuff was in the 1850s and 1860s, and that was a thing, like anti-Catholic prejudice, basically. And so we've had it for forever. I think that this ethno-nationalist freak out in America that's currently happening with regard to like how it gained momentum and what is its various axes of advance, that all started with Obama winning, and with people seeing the mass participation, the enthusiasm for Obama, and the fact that Black and Hispanic voters.
I was enthusiatic at the time. I was living in East Africa, thinking, "Oh God, is he the new Kennedy?" And what does that mean?
What basically happened though is that there were significant, since 2008 and the 2008 election, and the amount of voter enthusiasm and turnout amongst Black and Hispanic voters for Obama, this huge reaction has formed, basically trying to make it as hard as possible for Black people, specifically for Black people, to vote.
Yeah, same with us. The BLM movement here is, I think a lot of the bills, the police crime sentencing and courts bill, is a reaction to BLM last summer. I'd say.
I it's really, really sad. And I think, but the point I would make though is that I am not surprised that the American right would, use Central Africa as sort of a testing ground for these sorts of things, in the sense that I think anywhere where evangelical money can be used to affect. You have a similar thing in the UK with the extent to which evangelical money is being used to advance anti-trans stuff in British politics. Like that stuff is it's not particularly subtle, and it's there. And so, I feel as though,
you say it's not subtle, but then a lot of people don't know or are not interested.
I think they're not. I genuinely think they're not interested, and I think the fact is that Britain that's a whole different topic for another discussion. But it is surprising to me sometimes how, as long as you don't have a huge American flag slapped on it, people don't seem to realize the proximity. You know what I mean? You can take, it's like what you just described with
Stars and Stripes.
Yeah, with the bill in Uganda being almost identical to the bill in Texas. It's like, but someone paying attention will notice that. But similarly, if you take a wildly paranoid anti-trans flyer that a Republican politician might put in the mail for my parents in Southern Indiana, and you take that and the points that it's arguing versus what you might see from some of these organizations here in the United Kingdom, even if they are identical, because it doesn't have a big American flag stamped on it, people don't see it as...
But that's radicalization, isn't it? You don't know you're being radicalized, and do you ever know? It happens by stealth, and there's some people up there who knows what's going on and can moving the puppet strings, but the people on the ground, they haven't got a clue.
Yeah,
there's radicalization. It's interesting thing going on Twitter recently. Is I think one journalist, I forget her name, said something about Mumsnet, literally a place where mums are supposed to congregate, has been radicalized.
100%.
Anti-trans.
100%. No, I've been following this for a while because just because some of my friends have reported on it, and also one of my co-hosts for my UK show is a trans woman, and Mumsnet, she refers to it as like Chardonnay Al-Qaeda, like the level of just derangement on that. But the thing that I would say is that they another friend of mine, she's a white English woman. She and her husband, when they had their first child, she just Googling stuff for motherhood advice, wound up on Mumsnet and wound up being banned from Mumsnet because she didn't realize that if you use the expression cisgender, they'll ban you because they because they're so it genuinely is it's like the anti-trans zone with some parenthood advice as well, and so it's just things along those lines. You're just what is going on? How did this happen?
This all needs to be collated. I think do you know Dr. Nafees Ahmad?
I'm not. I don't.
Well, he just recently did an article for Media Diversified. Well, actually, it was first published in Byline, but we republished it. And so he collected. He did a sort of guide to all the 8 bills that are happening in in the UK at the moment,
I think I did read that. Yeah, I did read that article. Yeah,
borders bills, of course, says all of these different bills, GDPR, etc. And what was good about it is because it sort of gave context to what's happening. Fascism by stealth, authoritarian by like government fiat, and so I think we need something similar for what's happening with the DC crowd and all the little things that are like building up and so on, which we're not really noticing in the macro sense.
And I think that's the thing that ties it back to the involvement in the war in Yemen too, in a way, is that if this stuff is treated as the affected populations are treated as expendable, if that's treated as a cost of doing business, then you watch as this gets worse and worse. If people had, if from 2014, 2015 onwards, people were seeing footage shared more or less proudly by the Saudi military of them, bombing schools and things along those lines. You'd see stories of things like a minibus full of kids getting hit by a drone. All these things happening. This isn't a secret. And had that been treated as a red line,
who was writing against it? So the only journalist I remember from that time was Iona Craig, who's now also at Declassified, and she was writing great stuff about Yemen, but there wasn't much going on. But I ended up there was a Yemeni British journalist who I followed on Twitter, and I went to a talk he did about Yemen, and that's how I kind of knew a bit more about the secession, the tribal nature, and all of this sort of thing. But that's me, one person who's just like abnormally interested in this stuff, went to a talk, and it wasn't very packed, but not many people were talking about it then. I don't know who's talking about Yemen now. And I mean, ridiculous as it sounds, because I'm not a full-time writer at all. I have another job. I thought it is a abdication of my duty if I, as a person, if I do not write about this. I know that Owen Jones had done so recently before, and I actually, thankfully, only read his article after I'd written mine. And in some ways, for me, he got it wrong a little bit. He was saying the war has only been going on for 7 years. And actually, NPR said the same.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, not at all. Let's go back at like maybe 100 years and you'd be on it.
I genuinely think that one of the reasons why this is happening is because if you look up the Yemeni civil war on Wikipedia, it says 2014 to present.
Really? Is that what's happening?
It might genuinely be. But like, just because of my background, I knew the U.S. was involved with stuff that was like directly tied to, military response to the internal conflict in Yemen in the 2000s, like in the knots. And I realized that.
Did Britain's involvement then? Because Britain is the ones that they gave human intelligence to America, the US, which killed a lot of Al Qaeda and then ACAP people. It was Britain's intelligence that was driving a lot of this stuff.
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. I think just because of the fact that Britain, from my perspective, has been involved in the region, and also I think the amount of British, call it like the petrochemical industry, the sort of the heavy duty industrial involvement with extractive industry, in places like the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa and the Gulf and things like that.
About that, yeah.
Yeah, like the thing about it is that Britain's been there, like, when it was like the oil fields being initially opened up in Iraq post-war in 04, 05, like that was British companies doing that, things along those lines. Like Britain's been involved with this region for so long, both, politically and commercially. And so it doesn't surprise me that the extent to which this stuff, like you look at it and there's an extent to which so much of it is more or less like whatever it takes to preserve the status quo so that the things that the British state and its major industries make money from can continue to profit, like we'll do that. And I think brings it back to what we talked about previously with, it doesn't matter how many parliamentary motions pass, the British arms industry is not going to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. It doesn't matter how much pressure there is to get out. So I was going to say, I'm going to link to your article at Media Diversified in the show notes to this episode. And I feel like one thing that I think would be helpful, because you do this a lot, and I've seen you do this on social media as well, is if there are other journalists that you feel like their work has been, helpful to you in sort of organizing this piece, that you might give an opportunity so that I can link to them as well, so people can be aware.
Yeah, if you go in the piece, I think I've put a further reading section on there, all sources, which has everything that I used to write this piece. But obviously, then no, I haven't put Patrick Coburn's article. Is this the end of Psycho? Which is a great influence on me, but also, Notes on Nationalism by George Orwell is a seminal piece that everybody should read. There's some other things out there. I mean, Seamus Milne was doing good stuff on this. Some of the other sort of left. Well, I wouldn't actually call them leftists. I'd call them anti-imperialist writers who influenced my thinking over years, actually. And some of them are my friends, luckily. But yeah, it's all in the piece. But whatever you need, just tell me.
Okay. Well, like I said, thank you very much for making time to speak with me. And I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like we've covered Yemen and also a lot of other topics, but it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Didn't we? We left a lot of questions out there. I mean, if you can do any research into who's influencing Pretty, you let me know.
Yeah, the thought had crossed my mind that it is very, very strange, because I remember living through this in the 2000s in the US, seeing the sudden, like the fact that the anti-gay marriage stuff worked as a wedge issue, for Republicans, for, Karl Rove and Bush's team and stuff like that. And it just felt like it was just this grim movement towards, we win elections on the back of just humiliating and ostracizing gay people. And the tide turned in that regard, and obviously it was through the Supreme Court that gay marriage was legalized in America. It's still contentious and there's still a lot of pushback, but it's weird
to watch out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we now have like a fucking Opus Dei court, basically. So it's like they could very easily have a new decision to overturn that. But the thing that I would say is more along the lines of, it's been very strange, because I was, I turned 18 in 2002. I watched this stuff happen, and then seeing the same kind of thing happen with anti-trans stuff in the UK, or seeing the way in which, for example, a lot of this stuff was completely normalized, in the war on terror, with security cooperation that basically, led to, like, it doesn't matter what happens just so long as, our guys are in power. Seeing that stuff happen in the 2000s, and then, watching this happen now, where you can see that in the case of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, there's a lot more visibility. You can see more of like the atrocities like put on social media, for example, and it doesn't seem to move the dial at all. And that to me, I feel like, I hope more people pay attention, and I appreciate your, effort to bring attention to this and other issues. So I'm going to link to Media Diversified for sure. But if there's anything else you want to plug, Sam, before we go, please feel free.
Yeah, I guess I should do. I think I mentioned very briefly that I'd written a book. I've actually only written 90% of the book. There's still about 10% left to go. I'm hoping somebody will pay me to write that final 10%. But yeah, so I started a little a book blogger, Substack? Yeah. And it's called Between a Hard Place, what is it called? It's Between a Rock, a Hard Place, and a Dystopia. And you can find it by just looking for my name, Samantha Asumadu, on Substack, I guess. Obviously, my Twitter, I tweet out when I remember the various newsletters I do. I'm supposed to do 3 a week. I think I've done 5 it'll be 5 tomorrow. I was going to say,
you've been really busy.
Yeah, very busy. I mean, I'm doing a lot on the justice for IPPs, indeterminate protections for public disorder, which is a way that Labour and Tories have kept working class, black, brown, and white working class people in prison for years on very, very, very little reason for it. Often it's they've stolen a mobile phone without violence, and suddenly 17 years later they're still in prison. So doing a lot of work on that, and there'll be an article out with maybe tomorrow or Monday at Open Democracy that I've written.
Okay, excellent.
It's a little bit of an exclusive as well, so do look out for that, because there's some information that will come out there that hasn't been out before.
This should be out next week, so I will if those pieces have come out, I will link to them in the show notes as well. All right. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time. It's been great speaking with you.
No problem. Yeah, you too. Take care then.